So, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in town yesterday had a very, it seems, cordial meet with Donald Trump. They've known each other for some time, as BB has mentioned before.
A lot of admiration there.
And here's what BB said about Trump. And this was sort of riding to the rescue of Trump after a reporter had asked Trump about the attacks against him, suggesting he's a racist and all of the other things the left says as a matter of course. Here's Bibi talking about Trump vis-a-vis Israel.
I've known the president and I've known his family and his team for a long time. And there is no greater supporter of the Jewish people and the Jewish state than President Donald Trump. I think we should put that to rest.
That is a pretty strong statement. And, a good indication that the relationship between our country and our one reliable Democratic ally in the Middle East is going to be a lot stronger during the Trump presidency than it was during the Obama presidency. The other thing I just want to raise, because I'm a pretty big fan of Netanyahu, particularly when it comes to national security matters, the whole two-state solution.
Right, one state, two states.
His response on this to, the pedantic inquiry of the D.C. press corps was excellent. Take a listen.
With your question to the problem that I said, it's the label. What does Abu Mazen mean by two states? Okay, what does he mean? A state that doesn't recognize the Jewish state, a state that basically is open for attack against Israel. What are we talking about? Are we talking about Costa Rica or are we talking about another Iran? So obviously it means different things. I told you what are the conditions that I believe are necessary for an agreement. It's the recognition of the Jewish state, and it's Israel's security control of the entire area. Otherwise, we're just fantasizing.
Very clear. And I'll tell you what, if a Palestinian state would be like Costa Rica, then I would consider moving there, as like every Illinoisan, I'm looking for some place to move. But I think it would be much more like Iran than it would Costa Rica, I'm sorry to say, and I think that was part of Netanyahu's point. But for more on this topic and other geopolitical matters, we're pleased to be joined again by our friend Michael Rubin, a resident scholar for the American Enterprise Institute, the author of a number of books, including Dancing with the Devil and Kurdistan Rising. Michael, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dan.
So your reaction to the interaction between Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday?
Well, I mean, certainly for Netanyahu, it was a breath of fresh air after being basically public enemy number one to the Obama White House. That said, the dynamic was interesting simply because the two had never met before they walked into the press conference. Usually the two world leaders, the president and his guests, will sit down beforehand, but Netanyahu basically got out of his limo from the airport and walked right up to the podium. And so the two were actively feeling each other out during the press conference.
Well, what about the breathless reporting subsequent to the press conference about Trump breaking with U.S. policy for decades and suggesting that he, maybe he's not necessarily a supporter of a two-state solution, kind of keeping it open-ended, as well as suggesting that he's looking at moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem?
Well, what I interpreted Donald Trump to be doing was simply putting the Palestinians on notice that there is a ticking clock that's counting down and that it's in their best interest to make the deal now. For all that President Obama or Secretary of State John Kerry talked about how demography means that Israel needs to make a deal now, otherwise they would be overwhelmed by a Palestinian population between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, they actually got the numbers wrong simply because when you look at the Palestinian numbers closely, first of all, let's remember that Gaza has been functionally independent. Israel withdrew completely in 2005. The Palestinians count all the Israeli Arabs in Jerusalem, so in effect they're double counted. And there's 1 million Palestinians who have left the West Bank and Jerusalem, and the Palestinians still count them even though they don't live there. And so Trump is actually dealing a little bit more with reality here.
So you think he's being more diplomatic and just weighing the situation before deciding between a one and two-state solution?
I'm sorry, Amy, could you repeat that, please?
Do you think, he's being more diplomatic and just waiting to comment officially on whether he wants a one or two state solution?
Well, the Israeli policy is a two-state solution. So is the United States policy, and honestly, I don't think that's changed. What I heard differently from Donald Trump was a recognition that an Israeli-Palestinian deal doesn't need to simply be between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. After all, Israel has better relations now than it ever has with Saudi Arabia, with Kuwait, with Egypt, with Morocco, with the United Arab Emirates, and so forth. And so what Donald Trump was basically saying is you can make a deal now and you have more wiggle room. We have more wiggle room to be creative because there's much more of the scope is going to be much larger.
Yeah, I would have just said, per the clip of Bibi that we played talking about the two-state solution in response to that reporter's question, I would have just said, hey, I agree with what he said. Keep it simple. Want to get your temperature on this. Brett Stevens, writing the Wall Street Journal the other day, offering some Mideastern political rules for Jared Kushner. One of the rules he offered was the George Shultz rule. Ronald Reagan, Secretary of State, held to a clear principle when it came to negotiating with tough adversaries. Establish a reasonable position, announce your bottom line, stick to it, no haggling. It proved effective in dealing with Soviet arms negotiators, for example. And it seems to me that's Benjamin Netanyahu. What Benjamin Netanyahu has done is adopt the Schultz rule. Do you agree with that strategic approach that would make sense for Kushner to take as the front man for Trump?
I absolutely do agree with it. You know, oftentimes we hear in political rhetoric in Washington, in Europe, and elsewhere that the United States needs to be an even broker, and that implies that we have to come straight down in the middle. And that may sound good for people who have graduated from peace studies programs, but in reality what it does is it encourages both sides to stake out much more extreme positions, because if they know the United States is always going to be in the middle, well, let's shift to the more extreme and force the United States to force the middle to shift. What Brett Stevens, what Ronald Reagan, what I think Jared Kushner understands is that this simply isn't going to happen. And, you know, for all the cynicism that surrounds Jared Kushner, oh, he's Donald Trump's son-in-law, it's nepotism and so forth, he's probably the one person in the administration who really has been punching above his weight, not only on Israel but on Mexico, the other portfolio he has. He really has surprised a lot of people in a positive way.
Really?
Now, I got to get your take on this Wall Street Journal story that was mentioned in Mike Scott's newscast at the bottom of the hour. The story, spies keeping intelligence from Trump because they're concerned about leaks. With the Flynn saga and now this story and the tense relationship has been widely reported between at least elements of the intelligence community and President Trump. Do we have a real kind of internal revolt, enemies inside the perimeter problem for the Trump administration with respect to CIA, for example?
Well, absolutely we do, and it will be interesting to see whether Mike Pompeo, the director of Central Intelligence, can get this under control. But let's face it, you know, whether or not the spies like Donald Trump, whether or not I like Donald Trump, he's been elected president, and their job is to serve him. If there's an illegal leak of this sort of information, you know, that can go to the Congress has oversight ability. That could become a political scandal, but it's not for individual spies to make that call. I'm reminded of a statement that was published in 2005, just to the point that this is nothing new, where the former DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, Middle East chief, was bragging that the spies were purposely leaking to undermine George W. Bush's reelection. That was never investigated. This is a huge cultural problem within the intelligence community.
Well, do you think it will be investigated if these spies are keeping information from the President Trump?
Well, absolutely. Former federal prosecutor Andy McCarthy, who is a columnist at National Review Online, had a piece yesterday in which he argued, you know, we should just expose the transcript of the FBI transcript of the phone call between Michael Flynn and the Russian ambassador. If there's nothing there, then we know that the intelligence community should be the ones in the hot seat, because this wasn't a whistleblower leak, a one-time thing. This seemed designed to feed the press frenzy, and that's just outright wrong.
I wanted to also get your reaction to Judicial Watch, which had been the shadow attorney general until the installment of Trump as president, and now Sessions as attorney general. Got more Benghazi-related emails that, frankly, make it pretty clear, in case it wasn't at this point, that the attack on the compound in Benghazi was a direct breaching attack. It was not a protest that metastasized into attack. It was not an attack under the cover of a protest. This exchange between Patrick Kennedy at the State Department and other staffers, pretty damning. Does it mean anything at this point?
Well, at this point, unfortunately, national security has become such a political football that you would have in this case, Hillary Clinton was clearly wrong, but you're going to have Democrats still rally around her. I mean, she could say the earth was flat, and you could have Democrats rally around her. At the same time,
Yeah.
when it comes to what's going on now with regard to Michael Flynn and the Russians, Senator Rand Paul yesterday said, Republicans shouldn't waste time investigating their own party. I think that's flat out wrong. It's the job of the Congress to provide oversight, and if there's an investigation and shows there's no wrongdoing, well, fine, but we shouldn't be afraid of transparency.
All right. He is Michael Rubin, resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. You should check out his work at AEI as well as his previous books he's authored, including Dancing with the Devil and Kurdistan Rising. Michael, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Amy.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like